Hey, what's going on, Janetta? With that, I'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to go over how I do comps, because typically I'm the one doing comps between myself and Tasha on the team. With my background in financial analysis and numbers, it just seems to make more sense. And it's, spreadsheets and numbers and stuff are things that I like, not so much something that Tasha likes. She would much rather, be working the file or helping the client directly instead of working through the numbers. So this is sort of one of my areas of expertise, and we'll go through it. I actually just had a call yesterday with a potential multi-million-dollar listing appointment. So it'd be a little over right around 2 to 2.1 million, most likely listing. And we're going to go over that CMA today and how I did comps on that property, just because I think it's one of the most applicable ones. It actually pulled in a lot of different factors that you would want to consider that are not necessarily standard items. It's not in a gated community or a community where it's easy to pull comps, because like our community or other gated communities, when you have the same exact floor plan 100 times over, you might have that same floor plan sold 3 times in the last 4 months. It's very easy to pull those comps when they're in similar condition. You go off those numbers, you typically boost it a little bit for a market adjustment, maybe some difference in the rehab, et cetera, and your comp job is done. However, when you're doing, a 1920s house like this one was, 1929, that's not in a gated community, that has other proximity items that you want to account for, such as, busy streets and some other stuff, it starts to get a lot more detailed. And you obviously have to be able to tell that story to the seller as well, as you're walking them through it and telling them why their property may not be worth as much as they think it might be. So there's always that too, especially if they've owned the property for a while. There tends to be emotional attachment to the property. So with that, you're going to get sellers typically thinking that their property is worth more than it really is. And that's why it's important to look at the numbers themselves, take emotion out of it, and constantly refer them back to the numbers of this is what the market is telling us, as opposed to I feel XYZ. When you feel XYZ, it's very easy for the seller to invalidate your feelings and to say, that's great, I don't care what you feel, I want it listed at X. When you come at the issue with this is what the market is telling us, this is what the numbers show, this is the data, those are just facts. And regardless of what the seller's feelings are on the matter, those are facts that, unless they can provide other data that refutes it, those are the facts of the matter. And that's what you need to go off of as you go to price the home, if they actually want to sell the home. Right. And so some of those objections, if you get to that point, would be, well, I understand you feel as though the home is worth that much. This is what the market's showing us. Do you want to list the home at what you feel it's worth and not sell it? Or do you want to list the home at what the market is telling us it's worth and actually sell the home? Which one is your goal? Right. And then let them tell you. So I will walk through this. I'll walk through, some of the process of what I do. I'm going to share right now the most recent documents that I did. All right. So I'm going to walk through a couple pieces. The CMA I'll actually touch on in a second. I do want to touch on a couple other items. So one of the first things I do when I go pull comps is I do a lookup in the MLS to see if the house was recently listed, when its last sale was, any data I can gather from the MLS on the house that will give me some more insight. If it tells me upgrades on the interior of the home, if it's got photos, all that type of stuff is pertinent. So when I'm running comps on the property as I believe it currently sits before I go to see the property in person, I'm actually incorporating those types of things into it. So now I'm doing, rough estimate of interior quality of this house versus other homes that we're looking at, obviously assuming the condition's good, unless you've been given other data by the sellers, which I did actually have some of that data in this scenario. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second thing is I go to realist tax and I look it up based upon the property address. And you're going to look for the characteristics of the home. So you're going to look for beds, baths, square footage of the house, the lot size, the year build, again, property type, is it single family, condo, multifamily, that type of thing, because that's how you need to comp it out against. Recent sale price, sale date, all those types of things. And those help factor into where the comp's going to go as well. Then you want to look through the characteristics as well. It's important to look down here on the screen into this characteristics section that they have as you scroll down, because what's up here tends to be what was last listed in the MLS. So at the very top of the realist tax report, When you go down here, if there's anything that's different between the actual tax records versus the MLS, it will show it in these categories. And if that's the case, it will say, 3, like for Bass, it would say 3, and then next to it would have MLS, and let's say it was 4, it would say MLS:4. And what that tells you is at some point, someone listed it as a 4-bathroom, the tax record showed it as a 3. So either they mislisted it, which does happen at times, or there was likely an unpermitted 4th bathroom added, because if it was permitted, it would be in the tax records. So that's important to know. And then that leads into additional questions with sellers. You're doing the seller counseling interview of, do you have any unpermitted additions, et cetera, that we should be aware of? Okay. I go ahead and I look at the year built again. I also take note, I don't give it too much weight, especially like on this one you'll see, but I take note of what the real AVM is showing and what its confidence level is. That just gives you an idea what their statistical models think it should be within the realist tax system. This one's saying 2.5 is what they pegged it at, but with a 64% confidence rating, right? So that's a pretty low confidence rating in my mind, which tells me that they're not confident at all of this actual value, right? It also, this one provides a very wide range, basically 2.2 million to 2.8. That's a huge difference right there, right? In both terms of gross dollar amounts as well as percentage of the property value. So I'll look at that. I look to make sure that I know who's on title as well. So when we have conversations with the sellers, we make sure that we're talking to the appropriate parties that are on title. We can validate that ahead of time. And ideally, when you have the conversation with the sellers after you do the CMA and when you're doing conversations, to either set an appointment, et cetera, if they're actually going to go deep on the conversation about what you provide, commission percentages, that type of thing over the phone instead of in person, you want to try to have both decision makers present if there's more than one. Because otherwise what you tend to find is you might knock it out of the park with the presentation. You think it's great, but let's say the wife connected with a different realtor that she talked to and you didn't talk to her. A lot of times it's the wife making the decision on who they go with for the realtor. And so if you didn't talk to her and she connected with the other realtor, you're going to lose out on that listing 9 times out of 10. So it's important to know. All right, so next piece that I'm doing now for those that have Real Scout, part of what I look at is if I have a target price range in mind before I even start doing the fully detailed CMA, I'll go put in a couple of the prices into the new system piece that we have on there now, which is the buyer demand report, and look at the approximate number of buyers that are within Real Scout searching for that type of property, beds, baths, et cetera, in that area, in that price range, and then how that's going to fluctuate based upon either reduction in list price or increase in the list price. And this is important to bring to sellers, to show them the data, right, of how important the list price is to time on market and also both the likelihood of a successful sale. So that's that one. I also on this one provided her this one as well, just to show her some different numbers. So one was at 2 million, and then I was showing a 2.25 and the relative ones there and how big an impact it had. I mean, you're talking 40 buyers versus, this one had 62. So 50% reduction in the buyer pool, statistically speaking, off of Real Scout. We know not every buyer is on Real Scout, obviously, but this gives us some statistical modeling to bring to them. All right, the other thing that I do before I do the full up cloud CMA, which is what this is I'll go through and just do a really quick rough comp search within the MLS itself. And so when I'm looking for comps and what I recommend, and again, you have to expand this out sometimes if you can't get enough. But typical comp scenario, so let's say prior to the last 6 months where this market definitely shifted. So when you've got sort of a steady state market, it's going in the same direction at about the same pace. So even the last 2 years, although it was crazy, was sort of same direction, same pace. You're typically going to look anywhere from the last 3 months all the way up to the last 6 months of comps. You can go all the way back a year if you have to, if there's not enough. You typically want to go up or down 10 to 15% max on the square foot size of the property. You're looking for around the similar lot size. So if this one's a 7,000 square foot lot for this comp, I think theirs was actually an 8,000 square foot, somewhere around there. I would not go after a property as a comp that's sitting on a 25,000 square foot lot, right? If I did, I would have to make a massive adjustment for the difference in the land, just because it's so much spacious, it gives a different vibe, et cetera. You can set that up as a compound in LA versus a traditional house. So I look at that. I also look at vintage. That is important, but as you get older homes, the vintage gets less and less important. And so, if I'm looking at new condos, then I'm typically, if it's a 2014 condo, I'm trying to comp out condos from 2007 to new. If I'm looking at a 1929 home, like I'm looking at in this scenario, I'll look everywhere from probably 1910 all the way up through 1950 for the vintages, which is fine just because it's such an old home that at that point, another 10 or 20 years really doesn't make a huge difference. It is important to note that some of the building years, though, had different quality construction, et cetera, and can be more or less desirable. So that can also factor into the comps as well as you go make adjustments. So in this one, I went through, I pulled several different ones. I always pull the full MLS report with all the photos so that when I go back to reference these in the future, and I go, okay, what did I pull initially as the comps? What's the current comp set? I have all the photos to be able to look at for the interior condition of the property going through, and that's important. And it gives me a state of reference that I can then use when we get down the line if we list the property and we need to pull comps for appraisals, that type of thing. So it gives me my reference point at this point. Now, what I did on this one was I went through and I did the full cloud CMA. So I actually took the list, just to make it easier for myself, I took the listings that I found off the MLS that I was happy with, as far as these were my ideal comps that I wanted to use. And I input those when I went through the cloud CMA process instead of letting it pull it and then me having to try to find them all over again and all that type of stuff. I just input the address and as far as what I wanted to use. So there's a spot where you can do that on there. I deleted out a few of the pages because when I had to do this, it was literally requested, hey, we need this sent over if possible within like 2 hours. So I didn't have as much time to go through this. So I took out some pages of ours that were out of date, but if you can in your cloud CMA, make sure that your stuff's up to date so you include all the pages you want, including your bio and that type of stuff. This page I think is important so that people understand what CMAs are, so going through doing that. The map of the comparable listings is important. That's, just showing them where the comps are that you're pulling. And you'll see on this one, because I did not have enough comps within the time frame, I had to go a lot smaller than I typically would. So the subject property is 2,900 square feet. I have a couple comps in here that are 1,800 and change square feet. I would normally rule those out completely, but they were within the price range of where I thought the house was going to fall, and they were within a time frame that was reasonable to use, given the lack of sales inventory in this area. And so those were included. Again, this one wasn't as refined as I would have done had I had more time. Like I didn't do adjustments for the number of beds and baths. That typically is an adjustment as well, both in comps for listing as well as appraisers. When they come through, they'll make adjustments, although it's not as much as you would think it would be. And so like an appraiser coming through the house, typically what we see on an additional bedroom is they add about $10,000 to the value. And on an additional bath, if it's a half bath, they're typically adding around $5,000. If it's a full bath, they're adding around $7,500. Now, in no way can you build a full bath in LA right now for $7,500, but that's all they assign a value to it for an appraisal when it comes to doing comp sets. So that's important to know, so that when you have those conversations with sellers, you can also talk to them about that, because again, the whole job here, right, is identifying the proper marketing price and being able to sell the home. Part of the sale of the home, unless they find an all cash buyer, is going to be an appraisal. And so part of that is understanding and helping explain to the seller what the appraisal process looks like, how they're likely going to appraise out the house, and why certain features in the house that they think may be worth a lot of money, the appraiser is probably not going to assign value to, and it could kill the deal even if you get it under contract at the right price. So that's important to know as you walk through, because again, you don't just want a contracted sale, you need a successful closed sale, right, for all parties. So this map's important though to be able to walk through. This seller, for example, when we spoke with her yesterday, she discounted this property down here, the number 2, because she said, well, that's, below West Olympic Boulevard and that neighborhood's not as pricey. Now, the interesting thing is when you go look at that property, sold comp number 2 is actually $2.65 million. This is what it sold for. So that may be her perception of that neighborhood. That's not how buyers have recently been treating that neighborhood though, in comparison. The other thing important to note, which you'll see in the adjustments that I made, proximity to West Olympic is some of it. So all these have fairly close proximity to West Olympic being a fairly busy street. So knowing that, so when you go to do these, for example, one of the things I would do is you go to Google Maps, you type in the address, and then you drop the little guy on the map as the street view, little guy or female. and walk around, right? And so part of what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk to both ends of the street, and I'm going to see if either of the streets that are adjacent to this one, that are, cutting across them, are busy streets. And if so, I'm walking out into the middle of that street to get as good a view as I can, and I'm noting the number of lanes on that road. Number of lanes is going to be highly indicative of how busy the street is and how much noise that street produces. You can also go to some other sites. While we don't like some of them, Redfin, Zillow, whatever, some of them do have sound maps on them that you can go look at to see how noisy a particular area is compared to other areas surrounding it. So that's helpful as well, because those do factor into the saleability and the price of the homes. The final thing that I would say to note on this one is I started looking at comps, and you see it better. I'll pull it up right here. So if we go to Google Maps and 940 Hauser, I did get some data from one of the sellers that was helpful that's not on the map, which is that this house, actually it is on the map if you scroll enough. This house right here, they actually do preschool there. And so they host like a daycare preschool right north of the house. If you note, directly south of the house, both parcels adjacent to them, one is a center of hope, one is a treatment center. And so this property is directly adjacent. When I went to Chabad Treatment Center's website, it's for individuals that are struggling with drug and alcohol addiction. And so you have a property that's immediately north adjacent of a treatment center, which is obviously going to impact prices and desirability of the home. So that's one of the things I noted, because I was talking with the seller, and she's like, well, maybe on your cash buyer platform, you'll get a buyer that wants to come in and tear down the house and build new. I said that may happen under certain circumstances. I said, however, most of them right now are looking at just rehab and flip. Number one. Number two, right now with permit times with the cities, post-COVID, et cetera, it's too long to get permits, and most, people don't want to take that time because it's a 12 to 24 month process at that point just to get the permit to do a tear down and a rebuild. And third, you're right next to the treatment center and the center of hope. The likelihood that someone wants to toss a ton of money into this land parcel by rebuilding a new house that's going to cost them $2.5–3 million is very low. They're most likely just going to come in and do a rehab. So we need to keep that in mind for price expectations. And they understood. I mean, they knew obviously where their house was and what was right next to it. So, but those get factored into the CMA. So as far as the walking the street, like I say, I would just do this. So like this one, okay, great, Olympic Boulevard, and we can see it's a fairly busy road. So that factors in from a traffic perspective when we're looking at it. And then I can see the treatment center, I can see the one next to it, and see what that looks like. And then you could go walk this whole street if you wanted to and see what this looks like. The Google Maps can be very helpful. So properties right here. This shows me what the property looked like, and this street view was actually just done in July of 22. So this was done a month ago. So now I've got almost 100% accurate exterior condition of the house that I'm looking at. And so like the seller asked while we were in the interview, she's like, well, you haven't even driven by the property, but you're giving an opinion of value. I said, yeah, I understand. I haven't physically driven there. I haven't seen the inside because you haven't granted me access yet, but these are predicated upon condition being at a certain rate, but I have seen the outside of your property from doing a Google Maps. And by the way, we buy apartment buildings across the country, and this is how we do all our initial analysis of those two, is Google Maps and walking the streets. She's like, oh, okay, that sort of makes sense. So obviously they'll want us to go there to give final opinion before we finalize everything if we get the listing. But this is, this gives you a lot of insight. It can help you see the condition of the roof, condition of the outside of the house, the landscaping, all that type of stuff. So very, very useful. You're typically not going to get it within, that close a proximity time as to when you're doing the listings. Most of them for Google, you're going to be back in, and they've driven this one a lot. Most of them, you're going to be back in like 2015. So like, this is what the house looked like in 2015. I can go back and I can see, as you use Google Street View, you can see different iterations of what the home looked like over time, just by clicking on that and then clicking on the little photo. So that can be very helpful as well. All right, so back to the CMA. Again, those are the items that were pulled in. The sold listings, again, those are the comps. They were all sold listings. And then what I do is all the listings are included in full. for the same reason that I want to be able to go back and refer to them, look at photos, etc. I'm going to pull in the entire listing here for what's available for the client to see so that they can see, the photos of the property. So that one had the property, and then it has all the additional photos so that they can look at it and for themselves objectively compare what their property looks like compared to, the potential competition, if you will, that just sold. And so to go through that, and then I do price adjustments. So on this one, for example, there was a pool on the property. Their house does not have a pool. So you need to, even though for some clients, they won't buy a house with a pool, there is still a price value associated with having a pool at a house. And so today, if the pool is decent, you're probably assigning around 75,000 to it. If it's sort of a crummy pool, you're going to be in more the 30 to 50,000 range. If it's a really nice extravagant pool with really nice landscaping and you've got the waterfalls and the rock features and all that stuff, you're probably more in the 100 to 150 range, and that pool probably costs them about 250 to build. So those are your price parameters there. Again, just like with an appraisal, you're not going to get, if they spent 250 on a pool, you're not going to do a price adjustment either downward or upward of 250 grand because the buyers don't account for it that heavily. It's not a dollar for dollar return. This one also had a guest house. So I treat the guest house and the size differently. The size is one thing. So price per square foot, looking at size and making some adjustments, and having a guest house is sort of a different thing. This one was like extra added size due to the guest house over and above. So this one's a couple 100 square feet bigger, plus they had the guest house on it. So all that stuff was accounted for here. This one was also not next to the rehab center. I made a $250,000 adjustment for the fact, which, sounds like a lot of money, but you're talking about a 10% adjustment based on the fact that the house was immediately adjacent to the rehab center. Now, if there were 5 homes down the street, I would not have made quite as big an adjustment. It probably would have been in the 175 to 200,000 range. But because they're directly next to it, everything that's going on at that property is going to be heard at this property. There's no way around it. And then market timing adjustment. So this is an important one right now. What I'm doing is I'm looking at when did the comp property sell compared to when would we be coming on the market, both in terms of season, but also in terms of just where the market's at. So by the time that we would close on this house, we're going to be in similar season, right? But by the time we get it listed, then go through getting an accepted offer, probably, anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, and then a month for escrow. Our closing period is probably in November, December timeframe. So similar timeframe for closing. However, this closed December last year when the market was nuts. Interest rates were much lower, and we weren't in the current market today. So while most sellers are expecting to see an upward price adjustment on their market timing, that's not what I'm putting into play right now, because the reality is the market has softened some. And if you want buyers to come in and bid on the properties, and ideally multiple buyers to bid them up, you need to be perceived as somewhat of a value on the market today. Otherwise, it's not happening. And so that's why I put this in here, and you'll see this replicated throughout all the other ones as well as I make similar adjustments. What I do try to do as well is, I'm going to be in the same range on adjustments on each and every comp, right? And so you're not going to see the rehab center adjustment here at 250 and on another one just be 50,000, right? That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So what this then does, within the CMAs, it's going to take what the actual sale price was. It's going to account for all the adjustments that I personally made to it. It's going to show the adjusted comp price, and then also the percent change from the actual sale price to the adjusted comp price. And so this one's got a 23% downward adjustment based on all those factors that we just went through. As I go through, this one again was much smaller. The important thing to note here, when you have really small properties, there's a cost of entry into the real estate market, right? So, and this holds true for condos as well, even though they don't own the land. But typically the way I explain it to sellers so they can understand it is, look, there's a cost of entry, especially if the lots are similar size. There's a price that has to be paid for the land. That price is similar, whether your house is a 5,000 square foot home or a 3,000 square foot home, if the land's in a similar location, similar size. So what that's going to do is on the smaller properties, it's going to greatly skew the price per square foot upwards, right? And so you'll get sellers of a 3,000 square foot house looking at this 1,847 square foot home and going, why can't I sell my home at 1,151 a square foot? Well, you're not accounting for the land value, and you're not accounting just for the general entry cost into the real estate market in general, right? If it's a condo. And so that's something to keep in mind as you make adjustments. Again, on the appraisal side as well, typically on an appraisal, you're going to see the price per square foot adjustment anywhere from 100 to 200 bucks square foot in LA. Let me say that again. This one is sitting at $1,151 a square foot. When an appraiser comes through, if they're not finding the right comps that they need to justify the value and they go to make a size adjustment, they are typically, if you're bigger than the comps that they're using, they're typically going to give you anywhere from $100 to $200 per square foot for the larger house. And that's it. And we have fought them on that and fought them unsuccessfully because it's very subjective. They get to put in whatever number they want to. And in their mind, that's all that's justified. And unfortunately, even if they're 100% wrong, you can't get it overruled for that piece. We have had VA, for example, we've gone to them and had them overrule one appraiser. And he was just blatantly wrong on several things. And they basically told him to redo his appraisal or lose his VA certification. At which point the VA appraisal came back at value. Surprise, surprise. But usually that's not going to be the case. You're not going to be able to go through that process and get the appraisal completely overturned. So again, on these, I'm going through as well, and I'm going based upon whatever data I have from the seller on the interior upgrades of their property, or whatever I can find from the previous sales, assuming that they kept it the same. And I'm making those adjustments for the rehab condition of whatever property it is. And I'm doing it in general buckets. I don't do like $2,000 for a nicer kitchen, negative $3,000 for a worse bath, whatever. I look at the overall quality of the home because that's what leaves the impression on the buyers. And I'm giving it a light rehab plus adjustment, a moderate rehab plus adjustment, or a heavy rehab plus adjustment on its quality of rehab or condition compared to the current property. And that's both in usable state, also functional state, and the quality of materials used. And so that's definitely a judgment call, but it needs to be factored in because every buyer factors that into their buying decision. All right, so this one I went through, same type of adjustments. You'll see I did a fully rehab adjustment, 150 grand on this one compared to the subject property. Again, the 250 adjustment for the rehab center location, market timing adjustment of 25 grand negative, but then I gave them about a 250 grand boost for 1,100 square feet. So that comes out somewhere around, $210 a square foot, which was about the max that I could see justifying. And so this one only has a 7% or so adjustment, but it brings it down to about 2.1. You're starting to see a trend in, the numbers here, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, somewhere in that range. This one, same type of thing, went through. I would also look at zoning on the property. That is important. But typically it's most important if you've got an investor client that you think is the ideal client to sell it to. They're really, for the most part, going to be the only ones that care. With California laws now, you can split the lot if it's got enough space on it, build another home on it. You have to be the owner occupy of one of the homes. I think it's for 5 years. You can build ADUs, obviously, and there's all the ADU rules now in California, all those types of things, and that's without zoning changes. So zoning is much less important to your typical buyer that's just going to buy and occupy the home. For your investor client, though, however, they may want to come in, and if the zoning is correct, they may want to tear down a single family home and build multifamily. And if it supports medium density residential, that's going to be important to them. So that's the only time that I would really factor that in, is when it's got that type of zoning, and when we think the ideal client is someone that's going to come in and tear down the house and do a rebuild of likely a different type. This one, again, I went through, it's got a moderate rehab, so 75,000, adjustment for the rehab center being 250, and then a size adjustment again of around 250. That one was only a 3% delta. So it was a 3,100 square foot property, so this one was a decent size higher. It went, if you look in the upper left of these two, when you do Cloud CMA, it'll show the initial price and then the adjusted price for a quick reference. So this one went from 2.23 down to about 2 when I went through and did the adjustments for it. And that one, you can see, I mean, they did a nice rehab on this property. They also had it nicely staged when they sold it. That makes a difference. This seller ideally wants to put no money into the house and does not want to have to pay for any staging. And so that is going to influence how it sells. So I have all those adjustments there. Main house size adjustment, I have an ADU adjustment because the size was included in the total square foot. So I sort of backed it out, market timing adjustment, the full rehab adjustment on that one. And then going through doing the same thing on this. This one's a 2,000 square foot property. Just looking at the characteristics. So the big thing is going through and just being consistent with the types of adjustments that you're making. You know, as I went through and did this, for example, I refined my numbers a few times as I was looking around, seeing what impact it had on the direct market. Typically from a proximity standpoint, I didn't mention that earlier, but from proximity, I usually start at a quarter mile and then I'll go out if I have to, if I don't have enough comps. I also always set it up for the same city in the same MLS area. And so even if I have to go out to a mile or 2 miles for the comps, I want it to be in that same city because you could cross city lines, obviously, within 2 miles, and I want it to be in the same MLS area. Those are typically bound and set up for a reason. They tend to sell a little bit different based on how those are defined, the characteristics, the community characteristics, etc. So I want to bound it within those areas. And again, I'll go out further if I have to. All these, if you have to get enough comps, because you really need at least 3 or 4 comps to be able to go through and properly do a market analysis. You know, I'll make adjustments on all of them if I need to get the right number of comps, right? If I'm coming through and there's only one that sold in the last 3 months within a quarter mile within approximate size, then I'll start modifying some of the other things in the MLS to see what I need to go to for my parameters to then get the right number of comps that I need to be able to go through and do an analysis. There are other things to be, you know, aware of as well, obviously, like this one with having the treatment center next to it. But for example, if it's, you know, if it's got a positive aspect to it, like in Gardena, for example, there's certain areas of Gardena that are much closer to El Camino College than others. Knowing that market and knowing that if it's renter type clients that we're going after, being next to El Camino can actually be a positive thing, given the foreign students that you have there and the ability to rent out the rooms by the bed. So being in walking distance to the college, for example, as opposed to being driving distance could make a difference. And I would make an adjustment for that if I was comping one out in that area. So then at the end, it basically just goes through, it reviews it, it gives an overall summary of what they sold compared to what their original list price was, their days on market. I look at these and I help use this to tailor how I'm discussing this with the seller, given our team stats, assuming our team stats are better or equivalent. Right now, I think we're a little bit better on the price compared to list price, even though we operate typically outside of this area. And we're at like 9 days on market instead of 18. This seller in particular did ask, like, hey, have you guys ever sold anything in the 90036 zip code? I said, no, we haven't. You can go look at our history of performance on Zillow and see everywhere that we've sold properties. However, every single time that we sold properties in the past when it was new areas, our first time in the zip code, and we've never failed to sell a property. So if you want your property sold, we're pretty much as close as you can get to a guaranteed sold program. And oh, by the way, we don't currently offer a gimmick of a guaranteed sold program because most of those, if you look at them, they offer you about 65 to 70% of the market value to sell to the realtor that's guaranteeing the sale of your house if it doesn't sell in a certain period of time. As a side note, we have talked about possibly doing that internally to the team, but when that came up yesterday, we did not have one of those programs in place. And so, you know, that was the way to overcome that objection. This one also goes and looks at, you know, original list price, what it sold for, which ones the comp numbers were, and then how long it was on market. So it helps show based on pricing, et cetera, whether or not that had a huge impact. It can be somewhat misleading because, you know, the condition of the house, the size of the house, all those types of things, again, all factor into this price. So if I had a much more narrowly tailored comp set, I would look at this for some pricing indicators as far as where we needed to be for a quicker sale, if that's their goal. With this one, because we're ranging from 1,800 square feet to 3,100 square feet, the price is less of a factor just because you have such a broad range of home sizes. Same thing with average price per square foot. Again, your bigger properties typically are going to weigh it down some. So that's something to be aware of as you go through. I mean, you can see right here, like the 3,100 square foot property had a price per square foot of $644. The 3,136, $637. The ones that were in the 2,000 range and the 1,800 range, almost $1,200 a square foot. So this is important to show sellers because sometimes they can't wrap their heads around the fact that, you know, a 3,100 square foot house might sell for just a little bit more, if you will, compared to an 1,800 square foot home. And in this case, that is sort of just a little bit more. It's, 2.3 to 2.65 is 350 grand. So you're talking about around a 15% difference. That's not that much more for almost double the size of the house. So just something to be able to talk through with them as you're doing this. Closing, this is just our typical step that we have on there within our CMA. So this identifies what our next steps would be, how we do pre-marketing, all those types of things, where we post the property. We did go, a seller counseling interview or a listing presentation is a separate, training from this, but we did go over a lot of that stuff with her as well, as far as what we provide, what our commission includes, what our sale history has been. The fact that our team, part of the question is, well, there's a lot of good realtors in LA, why use you? I was like, great question. We're in the top 0.75% of all of California. We're in the top 1.5% nationwide of all teams and agents. Based upon sales volume, we've got 65-star reviews on Zillow. More than happy to point you to any of those resources. So I think that helped address that. Let's see, commission distribution. This just sort of helps you. This is within Cloud CMA. This just helps you overcome, one of the traditional objections, which is, oh, you're getting so much commission. And, it's just a graphic to be able to talk to, hey, yeah, that's the commission, but I get a piece of it, right? And then it gets split out to my listing broker, the buyer's broker, the buyer's agent. So it walks through that, why you need a real estate professional, great. This one is really important. So this one's just a traditional one in Cloud CMA, but it's actually a really good one to be able to talk to. And it talks to the fact as far as your exposure to the percentage of potential buyers in the buyer pool based upon where you price the house, which is what I was talking about earlier. So if you're at market value, you're probably hitting around 60% of the potential buyers within that pool. If you're 10% under, you jump that up to 75%, right? So 75% is a 25% increase over 60 as far as a percentage of 60%. So that's a big increase when you're increasing the buyer pool by that much. What we saw in the buyer demand report that we went over earlier from Real Scout was that it was actually about a 50% difference, right? So being able to talk to that. And then intelligent timing and process, again, this is just, you're going to get your most activity on the house typically in the first week or two. You want to be appropriately priced there. If you wait to drop your price till later to where the accurate price is, you're going to have a lot less activity on the home by that point. A lot less people that may be interested in it may come by and see it, and it could impact your sale and make it take even longer. And so that's what this talks through. Curb appeal, this is just stuff that they can do, staging. We give them, some top level tips on that, showings and open houses, how those go, and then the final steps. So it has this one has a notes section, like guidance, value of the house. We walked through the value with her where I told her the home most likely needed to be at based on the comps was around 2.1. And again, she asked if I had seen the inside of the house, and surprisingly, from her perspective, she's like, once you see the inside, you may want to adjust that down even more, because we've had a renter in there for 15 years or whatever, and the inside's not as good as it used to be. And so there probably needs to be some downward adjustment. So any questions on any of this that I can answer? I know you guys got to have questions. If you don't have them, think of something to ask for your colleagues that are not on the Zoom right now.
I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around the price adjustments and valuing, say, a pool at 75K. Like, where do you get those numbers?
Sure. So the pool of 75K is just based on my experience of about what it would cost to construct a pool around the LA area, being anywhere from 100 to 200K, especially once you've already got a house in place. You've got, narrow lots, typically getting the machinery back there and all the current cost of materials. But again, you're not going to give a dollar for dollar reduction or a dollar for dollar bonus if they have or don't have a pool, right? So you have to adjust for that somewhat. And some of that is subjective just based on experience. But you're going to be somewhere typically on most modifications to a home, you'll be anywhere from 40 to 75% of the value that it took to implement the improvement as the adjusted price. Like you can go out, Yeah, you can go out online and like there's MSNBC articles and other articles like that. Like, what are the best remodel jobs due to my home? What's the best dollar return for items? I don't think they have anything on there right now that says that you're going to get, 110% for an item that you add to your house, right? Most of them are in that 20 to 70 some percent range. And so you can use that as some guidance as well.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yep.
So Tasha gave us an assignment yesterday to, I don't remember exactly what she said. I'd have to go back to it, but I was trying to do the assignment today and figure out how to do it. And I don't know what the realist tax, what is another name for that? Because I don't have it with my MLS.
It's like a property record.
Yeah, property record, property tax assessor website,
Okay.
be any of those. You should have a link into it somewhere from your association or your MLS. It just may not look familiar.
I was playing around with it today. I tried everything, but I probably just don't know what I'm looking for. So I'll go back and do it again later.
Okay. Yeah, and the easy way to find it on properties, if they were recently listed in the MLS, like let's say in the last 20 years, typically, is you look up the property in the MLS and then usually it'll list the parcel number on there. And usually the parcel number is hyperlinked. And so if you click that hyperlink, it'll usually take you to that tax system where you'll get the property profile. Because that's one of the things EXP actually requires within SkySlope. So we've got to be able to get you access to that because EXP California requires it for your SkySlope files for purchase or sale of homes. They require the property profile, which comes out of the tax system.
Okay, I'll look at it again.
Okay. Else? I'll start calling on people with no more questions and make you come up with questions.
David, would you be able to kind of make an Excel sheet of like what, with your experience of like, hey, a bathroom in this area is going to be deducted this much or things like that. So we can use as like a kind of like a guideline.
Yeah, I can probably put together some guidelines for that. Yeah, just based on what we've seen on appraisals. So like I said, bed is typically around 10,000. Bath is going to be typically 5 for a half, 7,500 for a full. And that's the appraised value. That's not necessarily how the house is going to sell, right? But it does again factor into how you're going to do the CMA and how that appraisal may come through once you get a successful contract in the home. So it's important to weigh that as you're looking at it.
And as a real estate agent, do you give advice about, hey, if you fix up or you renovate your bathroom, the returns on this is probably the best. Let's say, for example, bathroom, if you want to sell at this certain price, you put in this X amount and the returns will be, more beneficial towards you.
Yeah, like we don't guarantee them returns, obviously, because that's the market's job and the market's going to tell us. But we can tell them, for example, if they've got a really outdated kitchen or if they've got a really outdated bathroom, say, if you fix these up, your home's most likely going to sell quicker and for more, right? Like a fixed up home is more desirable to most end buyers. You got to keep in mind, a lot of these end buyers, right, especially in California, they're scrapping to save up enough money to buy a house and put a down payment, right? And so most of them, when they move in, don't have any money for repairs. And so for them, in their mind, they're stuck with whatever house that they're blessed to get for probably the first 5 years, right? Till they can possibly make mods. So if the seller makes modifications ahead of time, that's in the buyer's best interest. Now it's rolled into the loan. It factors into the appraised amount. It makes it so that they don't have to come out of pocket for it on, post-closing to do the rehab. And yet, they're paying 20% of it as a down payment for a traditional loan. But most of them can, there's a higher likelihood they'll be able to afford that 20% as part of the loan, with the loan paying the remaining 80% than paying 100% out of pocket. A lot of them too don't want to deal with contractors. I mean, contractors are a pain. A lot of times they don't finish jobs the way they say. They do change orders. They increase the prices. It takes forever. They have people quit on them. They have people quit mid-job, right? And so a lot of families have heard all those horror stories and want nothing to do with contractors and having to do rehab. They'd rather just pay a little bit of a premium for a rehab home. So that's important to factor in when we talk to sellers. Now on the sales side, we haven't used it yet, but one tactic that can be used, which it's a program that was added into EXP, I think a year and a half ago, from this perspective. So there's two routes we can go on the sales side. If the home's in horrible condition or medium horrible condition, we can go after cash buyers, right? And we have that platform within EXP on all these. Whenever any of you are talking to sellers, even if you're not express offer certified, we are. So you can always talk to the seller about, hey, we have an express offer platform. Us as the team leader can still lead that, send out the documents to them, etc. You can, on our behalf, fill out the questionnaire that needs to be filled out. It's like a 5-page property condition report, and take the photos for us, and then we can submit it to express offers and try to get them an all cash offer in its current condition. So that's one option if the home needs just a ton of work, or they don't want to do anything and they're fine, they just want to sell quick. That's a great option. We've done a lot of those. The other one is a program that we haven't used yet, which is called Curbio, which EXP agents have access to. And Curbio will actually come in. They will project manage the entire rehab. They'll come in with general contractors. They'll bid out what the rehab cost would be based on what the seller wants to do, the quality of materials, all that type of stuff. Their price, supposedly, if I recall correctly, is fixed. It's not supposed to go up. So there's that aspect of it. And basically what they do is they front load all the money into the repairs. They do a contract agreement with the seller where they can put a mechanics lien on the house if they have to for that repair value, so that they're getting paid back at some point. They make their money through the management fees, the general contractor management fees and stuff like that. And then when the home sells, ideally for a much higher price, obviously, because it's been fixed up, Curbio is going to get paid their amount, then the mortgage gets paid their amount, and then the seller gets the rest. And ideally what's happening through that, since the home is repaired, it's selling quicker and it's selling for more money, and it's selling for more than they actually put into it, due to all the factors that I talked about before, where a lot of people don't want to deal with that hassle.
Okay, and so let's say you price this home correctly, market value, and you have an appraiser, right, that rated it way less.
Yeah.
As a buyer, when they try to get out that loan, it's up to that appraised price, right? So they can't take out a loan higher than that. How do you overcome that? Because you can't win the argument with the appraiser, right, necessarily.
Yeah, so I mean, your first thing that you try to do, obviously, is combat the appraisal if you believe that the house is actually worth more. After you do that, the next step would be taking that to the lender with the justification, because sometimes the lender, so typically it's the lender and in-house or their underwriting staff that actually does the notice of value on the file for either conventional or VA, and they can actually override the appraisal. The appraiser is working on behalf of the bank, on behalf of the lender, right? So they have the internal underwriting decision in-house to be able to override them if the appraiser is not willing to change their tune. If that doesn't work, you really only have a few options, right? The buyer and seller can decide to cancel the sale. The buyer can come up with the additional money out of pocket. They're going to be out of pocket the full 100% of the difference, and then their normal down payment is going to be off of the appraised value, because the loan, to your point, is based upon the purchase price or the appraised value, whichever is less, and the loan to value is based upon that amount as well. Or the third option is they can negotiate down, right? The buyer can try to negotiate the sale price down to where the appraisal's at. Depending upon what type of appraisal it is, the appraisal either sticks with the home or it doesn't, right? So that can factor into it as well.
Okay, I think another option on that is, and also, have you dealt with a buyer taking over a seller's loan? Because I think that might become a thing to keep the mortgage rates down, right?
Right. So we see it come up a lot on like Bigger Pockets, on Active Duty Passive Income, on some other forums. I have yet to be involved in a transaction where the buyer assumed the seller loan. Typically, the reason is with as much appreciation as we've had in a short period of time over the last 7 years in Southern California, buyers typically don't have the amount of money they need that they'd have to do for that loan assumption. So your choices on the loan assumption to do that would be 2. The buyer can assume the loan, and again, they have to be fully credit approved by the lender as well, right? The lender has to approve that. So the buyer can assume the loan, and they can come up with the entire down payment, which is the difference from the current loan amount, not the original loan amount, but the current loan amount, right? And the sale price, because that's what they owe to the seller. That's what the seller needs to walk away with after they pay off their commissions. Or you can try to do a seller financing, or you can do a blend of the 2. Now, most sellers, unfortunately, in this environment, don't want to walk away and do seller financing and get their money over time. They want their money today. Right. So that's the biggest hurdle that you see. Like right now, we have a 2.25 on our condo. I would love to sell it as an assumption at some point to a fellow veteran and keep them at a 2.25% rate. But even though we refinanced like 3 years ago, our condo now is worth probably 240 more than we refinanced for 3 years ago. And we refinanced it like, I think we're at 100%. Yeah, we did the VA cash out refi. We're at 100% of appraised value. So it's gone up that much in 3 years. So that's the issue that you run into. It's a great idea, especially now that rates have jumped way up, right? To be able to do an assumption at like 2.25 to 2.75 when rates are in the 4s, 5s, and low 6s. It's just you tend to run into those hurdles with the difference between the loan amount and what the house is worth. All right, who else got questions? I'm gonna start calling on people.
Mhm. I think that's a good question.
I don't have any questions now. I want to go in there and play around and try to do it.
Okay,
I actually think I'm
like what? Have them go do one?
doing.
What was your homework that you gave? Something
That was
different?
for next Tuesday.
Okay. So Tasha wants me to give you guys homework. So I'll give you homework. Go off and pick a property that is not in an HOA community. Because again, those are too easy. So pick a property that's not in an HOA. That doesn't have, 50 of its same floor plan right around it. And do a CMA on it
And send it to him.
and send it to us so we can look it over.
Do by when?
Next, you want,
Wednesday.
today would be Wednesday.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, by next Wednesday should be.
All
good.
right, next Wednesday before the call or close of business? Just next Wednesday at midnight?
Yeah.
Okay. Wednesday at midnight.
David, for the CMA, you just want a simple CMA, not a whole presentation, right?
I
Well,
would,
we need to see your
yeah,
data.
I would say
so-
start the process like I did, right? Go in and use Cloud CMA.
Yeah.
You're gonna want to have some of this stuff built out anyways. Right? And what you don't want to do is you don't want to get to a point where you have a seller opportunity and you have nothing built within your CMA system and it takes you 3 days to get through the CMA and the seller's already moved on.
Okay.
Right? So that this is part of the task, if you don't have current active clients that you're working with that are taking up your entire day every day, start doing some of this work that's, unpaid work up front, but that's needed to be successful in this industry. So I think it'll be helpful for you.
And you only pulled 5 properties because your properties were kind of different, right? Square footage and whatnot.
Right.
I pulled up the open house I'm gonna go to on Saturday, and I found 3 almost identical properties, one on the same street that just sold a month ago too.
Yeah.
So would 3 be the rule of thumb for CMAs?
Yeah, I mean,
3 to 5.
if it's identical type properties, 3 is typically fine if it's within the last couple months. If it's,
If you're going
properties,
to justify the value,
right.
you may need more if it doesn't.
If it's properties that are wildly different like this, I mean, these are 1920s built properties where none of them at this point, for the most part, are the same anymore. They could have been when the developer, whatever developer initially built them, right? But these weren't necessarily tract homes either, right? Like around where we're at in Redondo Beach, we have the TRW tract where a lot of stuff was made, built for the TRW employees coming in and stuff, after the war and all that. A lot of those homes are very similar floor plans, but these types of houses, they started different and then they've had almost 100 years to be modified. So if you're talking again, a 2010 and newer, and it's, 3 of the exact same floor plans, and now you just got, difference in upgrades, yeah, that's probably sufficient. So, but for this assignment, don't do that type of house. Do this type of property where it requires all the various adjustments, and there's nothing really similar around it.
And then this will be posted so we can use it as a reference to go back to, because although I'm sitting here and I heard everything, I don't know if I'll remember everything when it's time
Yeah.
for me to do the assignment.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
Tasha will
yeah,
upload
it'll
the
be
video.
posted.
Okay,
And then we'll take a look at you guys' CMAs that you submit and give you some feedback on it.
okay.
Cool. We can go down the list. Alexis, any questions?
No, I'm pretty good. The Google Maps thing was pretty much the only thing that was new to me. Like,
Okay.
other than that, I've done all of this before.
Good. Charles?
Not at the moment, but I'm sure I will in the future. So
Okay. All right, Andy,
Nope, all good. Thank you.
you're welcome. Dan?
He's always driving.
Yep, all good.
Okay. Sam?
All good over here.
Okay. All right, cool. I expect everyone to have like 90% success rate on their CMAs next week, since everyone's good and doesn't have many questions. It's all right. If you have some errors, we'll help you fix them, but it's a learning process over time. You know, again, my background is in a lot of numbers fields, right? So engineering and then MBA. And we've been doing this obviously for several years, also invest, and I do a lot of analysis. So that's why I do them for between Tasha and I. But this is stuff that you guys need, you know, good practice with, need to hone this skill, especially for the time when we're not in California and you guys are going after listings and
I
all that
just
type of
wanna
stuff.
say,
This is a critical skill.
I'm still pretty darn good at CMAs.
You are.
Just saying.
You are. I just tend to do a lot of other adjustments.
You do,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So-
David and Tasha, I mean, besides the homework, right? If anyone here wants to participate in more, we can always just send it to you for review. And
Oh,
for
yeah.
your listings, we can
Yeah,
also send it for
absolutely.
reviews, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can use this for buyer clients too. I mean, you may not go as in depth, but just
Right.
having an idea of what their, what the purchase price is will help you with, your clients with, figuring out what they want to, purchase the home for, and if that's going to come in at value or not.
Yeah.
And here's the last question too, just curious. Is it appropriate or is it common where a buyer agent can go to a listing agent and ask them for their CMA to see how they came up with the valuation?
So typically what you'll do is when you get near appraisal, you'll ask the listing agent. The listing agent will typically provide comps for the appraiser. The buyer's agent can also typically provide comps if you coordinate that ahead of time with the listing agent, see if there's anything different that you're pulling up versus what they're pulling up. If your client's not seeing the value in the property, and they think that it's way overpriced, then yeah, I mean, I would go back to them and be like, hey, my client looked at it. They're not seeing the value justification based upon the comps that they're reviewing, what they're seeing on the public facing sites, everything else. Can you share with me what you use to justify the price as you put this out there and listed it, so that I can try to take that back to my client and walk them through it? And I think that's fine, as long as you approach it, more as, hey, can you give me this to help me, talk my client through it to where we might be able to get to a deal, as opposed to showing up with, you way overpriced this and there's no way, and I want to see your work, right? You're not checking their math equation and telling them they're wrong. You're trying to work together as team members, right, to get through a successful purchase. But in that, you've got to be able to justify, rightfully so, whether or not the property is worth it to your buyer. What I will say is, in a year ago's market, when buyers would ask us for, hey, what do the comps look like? Where are they at? It was stop asking about the comps. Like, the comps, literally in that market, the comps did not matter. It's, are you willing to pay this amount? Are you willing to pay over the appraised value if it comes down to it? That's it. You have your competition you're going against. You're not in an environment where it's 1, 2, 3 offers, and now you're trying to make sure that you're right at where you need to be value-wise and everything else. You're buying the house based upon future anticipated value, was sort of where we're at a year ago. We're not in that market right now. And so right now, you're probably going to start hearing buyers ask more about comps again. Cool. Any other last questions from the team? On once, twice. All right. Hopefully this was valuable for you guys. This will be a critical skill for you if you want to take listings, especially in a very competitive environment. Listings, you know, from a real estate standpoint, listings tend to be looked at as the more favored child, if you will, between listings and buyers. You know, whether right or wrong, realtors have it in their mind that listings are less work and also create more business. They do tend to create more business. You have listings, you can have open houses that can create buyer clients. Your seller may need to buy another property that creates another buyer client, you know, so you can get multiple transactions off of a single one. So this will be a critical skill to have as you look to grow your business. Cool, guys. Well, if there's
Thank
nothing
you.
else, you're welcome. Hopefully it was valuable. If there's nothing else, I'm gonna stop it for today.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, boss.
Bye, Irvin. Have a good morning.
You too, boss. Have a good evening.
All right. See you, Irvin.
I go take my breakfast right now.
Sounds good. All right,
Is
bye.
it chicken sausage?
No, that tinolang chicken. It's a